What does a relationship look like between a Type 4 individualist and a Type 5 investigator? Well, let's start off by talking about a few things they have in common. When I think about the shared traits of Enneagram 4s and 5s, I think about cities like Portland, Oregon, where you can get an amazing $9 latte at a cafe/poetry lounge that's next door to a vintage arcade that only has games from the 1980s. On the surface, it may not seem like these two things have much in common, but deep down, there's an equally eclectic, imaginative, or just plain weird vibe that brings them together. And I don't use the term weird in a judgmental or dismissive way, but rather in the way that Portland does, with its unofficial city motto of Keep Portland Weird. Jokes aside, the Enneagram 4-5 pairing navigates life based on their rather intense thoughts and feelings, which often override their desire to be pragmatic or to take up conventional roles within mainstream society. Now, this can be explained in large part by this couple's triadic pattern. Here you'll see that 4s are in the heart center, so they're primarily influenced by their emotions, which they then stir up with the imaginative thoughts of the head center. 5s, on the other hand, are in the head center, so they're primarily influenced by their rational thoughts, which they then stir up with the dramatic emotions of the heart center. This leaves the desire for practical action, which is what's represented by the gut or body center, fairly underutilized by your average 4s and 5s. Interestingly enough, the 4's movement of integration is to the Type 1 reformer, while the 5's movement of integration is to the Type 8 challenger, both of whom are primarily in the gut triad center. So while these types have significant differences in their core perspectives, they often bond over a very similar struggle to take their elaborate or imaginative inner worlds out into the real physical world. On a similar note, 4s and 5s are both withdrawn types within the Hornevian triad. If you haven't heard of this before, it's basically just a way of grouping Enneagram types based on their broader social patterns and preferences. Now, most withdrawn types can and do behave like your classic introverts. But with that said, both 4s and 5s can look very bold or outgoing when they're operating within their particular field of expertise, which can be anything from the stage to the boardroom. The reason being that withdrawn types only move away from people when they feel like they need to protect themselves. And to be more specific, the 5 moves away from people to protect their objectivity, while the 4 moves away from people to protect their identity. This also ties back to their place within the triad centers, as all head types are focused on overcoming their mental instability, while all heart types are focused on overcoming their emotional instability. So when 4s and 5s get overwhelmed, they withdraw into familiar hiding places where they can endlessly process their inner world, far away from all the destabilizing noise of other people's thoughts, feelings, or expectations. Okay, the last major point of connection for 4s and 5s is the most obvious one, and it's the fact that they're each other's wing. The 5-wing 4 and the 4-wing 5 are two of the most unique subtypes that you will likely ever meet, as they bridge the gap between the very different operating systems of the head and the heart. I'll reference these subtypes more as we go along, but for now, I'll just say that this overlap in wings tends to make this pairing even more unconventional, minimalistic, moody, and passionate about more spiritual or ethereal concepts in life. So they're basically this channel's key demographic. All right, that's enough about shared traits, which means it's time to dive a little deeper and talk about what may specifically attract a Type 4 individualist to a Type 5 investigator, and vice versa. Fours can take up a lot of emotional real estate in a relationship, which is often why they prefer having a partner who does the opposite. Well, 5s typically require little to no emotional real estate in a relationship, especially if they have a strong 6-wing, as that keeps them firmly planted in the rational world of the head triad center. Now, that's not to say that 5s aren't emotional creatures, because as I said earlier, 5s activate or intensify their mental pursuits with the emotions of the heart center. So on the one hand, 5s maintain a steady, almost stoic demeanor that allows the 4 to feel like the 5 can handle the emotional turbulence they're sure to bring to the relationship. And on the other hand, when 5s feel secure with their partner, they often lower their mental guard to reveal a rather surprising and emotionally exhilarating side of themselves, as they introduce the 4 to all their wild ideas, creative experiments, and/or taboo interests. All of which normally feeds the 4's desire to cultivate a uniquely passionate brand of intimacy. Secure 5s also embody many of the more commanding or virile traits of the Type 8 challenger, as that's their movement of integration. Now, this can be attractive to 4s for many reasons, but perhaps the biggest reason is because it provides them with a confident sense of direction, especially during times of crisis or complex decision-making. Speaking of which, if we take a look at the harmonic triad, which describes the way each Enneagram type copes with difficult situations, you'll see that 4s are reactive types, while 5s are competency types. While this isn't always a recipe for cohesion, it does provide the 4 with a nice objective sounding board to help ease the kind of emotional distress that leads many 4s to make impulsive or even self-destructive decisions. On a similar note, the 5's deep attachment to rational objectivity can actually make them fairly open-minded people, as they believe it's vital to obtain as much information as possible without being swayed or inhibited by outside influence or irrational moral restrictions. This is even more true of 5s with a strong 4-wing, who are nicknamed the iconoclast because they actually enjoy exploring ideas that run contrary to popular or traditional ways of thinking. Well, as you can imagine, someone who is both open-minded and fearlessly independent is often quite attractive to the 4, who feels like they've found a kindred spirit on a parallel journey of individualistic self-expression. It also helps that the 5 rarely, if ever, tries to intrude upon the 4's personal journey, as they offer the same generous amount of space that they themselves crave, which ultimately leaves the 4 feeling free to follow their heart's desires. All right, on that lovely note, let's switch gears and talk about a few things the 5 finds uniquely attractive about the 4. Fives are extremely selective about who they let into their lives, and for good reason. First, they're easily bored by most people, and second, they struggle to see the benefit in sharing their precious physical or mental resources with just anyone. Now, 4s definitely pass that first barrier to entry with flying colors, as they're anything but common, average, boring, or God forbid, normal. In fact, 4s with a strong 3-wing pride themselves on standing apart from the masses of society thanks to their rare and refined taste, which is why they've been nicknamed the aristocrat. So the 5 often finds the 4 to be a wonderfully engaging conversationalist, not only because they can go deep on equally obscure topics, but because they approach life with such emotional intuition that the 5 is drawn to fascinating places their rational objectivity would have otherwise never taken them. Interestingly enough, despite the 4's desire to stand out from the crowd, their empathetic approach to life often leads them to search out universal truths that bring meaning to this mysterious and often painful human experience. Throughout this process, the 4 often cultivates the kind of fearless approach to dark subject matters that convinces the 5 that they can handle, if not appreciate, their often spooky or controversial inner world. Now, as the 4 eventually earns the 5's trust and respect, they start to demonstrate the value of integrating a more heart-centered approach to life, as even the most brilliant ideas will fall on deaf ears if they're not rooted in some kind of emotionally compelling narrative. Now, I can already hear some of the 5s out there going, I don't care about making my ideas relatable or heartfelt. To which I'd say, healthy 5s do, as their movement of integration pulls them up out of their cynical isolation and into the real physical world, where they find a deep desire to use all the information they've collected to have a positive impact on their environment, much like the Type 8 Challenger. In this space, and with some help from the 4, the 5 learns to create things that aren't just meticulously crafted, but also emotionally resonant. It also helps that the healthy 4's movement of integration is to the Type 1 reformer, which manifests itself as some rather elite standards that actually dovetail nicely with the 5's desire to consume all available information so they can execute with precision. Ultimately, the 5 finds the 4 to be an equally interesting yet wonderfully different partner who not only accepts but elevates the innovative intelligence the 5 brings to the outside world. All right, now that we've covered a few things that can bring 4s and 5s together, it's time to talk about what can pull them apart. Hey there, friend. Looks like you're a little more than halfway through this Enneagram relationship episode, which means it's a great time to not only watch this fancy little neon graphic float off into the distance, but to hit those like and subscribe buttons, you know? You know what I mean? You know those buttons that are sitting right there? Don't be coy, you know where they are. You know, if you're feeling non-committal, you can just hit the like button. It's still really helpful. Okay, let's get back to it. Every once in a while, there's an Enneagram pairing where even people who are fairly new to the Enneagram will look at the two types and go, I feel like they're going to have a lot of tension. Well, this is one of those pairings, as the 4-5 relationship is an obvious clash of emotion versus logic, intuition versus information, and intimacy versus isolation. And sometimes that clash is happening not only externally between these two partners, but inside each partner themselves, if they happen to have a strong overlap in their wings, i.e. the 4-wing 5 with a 5-wing 4. So yeah, a lot going on here that can play out in many different ways depending on both partners' wings, instincts, and of course, their level of health and maturity. But in general, the pattern of conflict that plays out for this couple looks like the stressed out 5 getting all anxious and scattered like an unhealthy 7, as that's their movement of disintegration. This makes the 5 dive even deeper into their mental pursuits, as they desperately search for a new skill or new information that will allow them to once again feel secure navigating the outside world. All of which makes them very sensitive to disruptions in their personal space, as their ability to focus is hanging on by a thread. Now, when 4s are stressed out or insecure, they can get very dramatic or clingy like unhealthy 2s, as that's their movement of disintegration. This is usually rooted in the 4 feeling like their attempts to express themselves or spend time alone processing their emotions has somehow bothered the 5 or fractured the intimacy they once had. So now the 4 goes into desperation mode and comes whipping through the 5's sacred personal space like an emotional tornado, which just causes the 5 to hide deeper within their mental storm cellar. Unfortunately, all that does is trigger the 4's fear of rejection. And if they're particularly unstable, they may just ratchet up the drama even more in a last-ditch effort to evoke some kind of reaction within the 5. However, most 5s refuse to play this game, and instead they interpret all this drama as evidence that they're simply better off alone. In fact, the hardest part about both types being in a relationship together is that they share a kind of cynical narrative about the way they're destined to be alone, which then makes quitting relationships a very easy and natural thing to do. For 5s, this is rooted in a strong survival instinct that tells them it's just easier to manage resources when they don't have to share them with anyone else. And for the 4, it's more about feeling inherently broken or unlovable, and so they often act out in self-destructive ways, like having an affair, in order to push their partner away before they themselves can be rejected. Ultimately, these narratives are rooted in a deep sense of hopelessness about their own potential future. And that dark outlook on life should be a big red flag for both partners. Alright, I know this couple is typically unafraid of exploring dark potential realities, but for the sake of any other types watching along, let's go ahead and pull up and talk about a few things this couple can do to keep the mood as light and loving as possible. Alright, the first tip I have for this couple is focused on getting 4s and 5s out of their head-heart spirals and into their least activated triad center, which is the gut or body center. Obviously, exercise is a great way to do this, but since 4s and 5s tend to have very different body types and very different interests, don't feel any pressure to land on the same activity. Oftentimes, the 5 needs something like a rock climbing gym that lets them integrate their problem-solving mind with their physical body, while the 4 prefers something like a dance studio that lets them embody their emotions. I almost started dancing there. That would have been bad for everyone. Whatever it is, just commit to some kind of regular physical activity, as it'll not only ease the mounting anxiety or emotional distress you may be feeling, but it'll also just be a great way to get you up out of the house. And speaking of putting yourself out there, the next practice I have for this couple is to put on a talent show. Now, this can be a serious production or a simple show and tell, but the point is to have a recurring date and time when you both have to reveal what it is you've been working on, studying, or obsessing about behind closed doors. I personally think you should do it at least once a year and try to put some real effort into it, as it'll help you accomplish 2 things. First, it'll give you both a hard deadline that either inspires or just pressures you to create some kind of final material product, which is something you both tend to resist. And second, it'll give both partners a chance to show their support for each other's passions. This is vital because the more 4s and 5s feel like they can't share what they care about with their partner, the less invested they become in the relationship, which then fosters that cynical or hopeless view of romantic relationships that we discussed in the previous section. And that brings us to my final tip for this couple, which is to carefully nurture your positive thoughts and feelings. This is a bit of a callback to the harmonic triad, where we saw that 4s are reactive types and 5s are competency types, which means neither partner brings a particularly positive outlook to the relationship. Now, there are many creative and transformational ways this couple can practice cultivating a more positive perspective, but the most important thing I can think of for today is to simply remember that your eyes are a lamp unto your body, which is to say, be careful what you spend your time looking at. For example, 4s are prone to wasting hours envying the lives of other people while mindlessly scrolling through social media. And 5s often get sucked into dark, unexplainable mysteries that trigger a real existential crisis or at least a nihilistic view of reality. So instead of constantly consuming things that make you feel depressed, on edge, or detached from your life, try seeking out some people or experiences that uplift, inspire, or ground you in a more joyful and lighthearted perspective. And just know that you both have a tendency to discount or mistrust your positive emotions. So be ready for your ego to fight it when you think about trading alone time in the gloomy basement of despair for some laughs up in the sunny rooftop karaoke bar. However, that resistance is almost always a sign that you're headed in the right direction of necessary discomfort and personal growth. All right, that's enough advice for now, which means it's time to wrap things up, as we always do, with the patented YGAT relationship rating system. First up on the YGAT relationship rating system is the spice meter. And I'm gonna put the 4-5 couple at about a 7 out of 10, thanks to the collision of intense emotions and intense ideas that can lead to some rather heated conflicts or heated experiments. You get it. Next up is the power meter. And since this duo tends to get lost in the imaginary or theoretical world of their head-heart feedback loop, I'm only gonna put them at about a 3 out of 10. However, they're definitely a 10 out of 10 in that imaginary world of theirs. So there's always that. Last up is the fun meter. And while fun for the 4-5 pairing isn't your standard dinner and a movie variety, they do have their own brand of enjoyment, which usually looks like debating existential philosophy by candlelight or indulging in a late night horror movie marathon or something. Certainly not mainstream fun, but intriguing nonetheless. So let's give them a 4 out of 10. All right, folks, there you have it. The Enneagram 4-5 relationship. An esoterically spicy, imaginatively powered, and offbeat fun kind of couple that probably has a boho art studio / fallout bunker in their basement. Hey, just because they're zombies doesn't mean you shouldn't have a proper cappuccino while workshopping your one-act play about being the last couple alive. Am I right? That's a wrap on this Enneagram relationship episode for the Type 4 Individualist with a Type 5 Investigator. If you're shutting it down here, then I will say thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, then please do me a tiny little favor and hit those like and subscribe buttons for me on your way out, if you wouldn't mind. But hey, if you're sticking around for more Enneagram goodness, then I have got plenty of relationship-themed content for you to choose from right here on the screen, as well as some more lighthearted content if you need a break. Take your pick.